Hey Reflections! We're doing this. We're actually doing this today. I'm so excited. I did everything I could to be as calm and relaxed as possible and get some energy. I didn't really take anything today. No Ormus, none of my stuff I usually take, so I've just been tired. I have to take that as soon as I'm done with this. But I did get an hour-long massage, which was really, really awesome. Okay, so we're going over the battle for the past. I'm basically doing the first part, the introduction. The introduction is 4 chapters long, and the first chapter of the introduction of the Chronicles is the battle of the past. Now, he talks about Mesopotamia, which stretches from the Tigris to the Euphrates, and this is known as the cradle of civilization. He's going to reference experts like Samuel Noah Kramer and Thorkild Jacobson a lot. This is basically just different examples of how the timeline of our view of the history of humanity and the history of agriculture and the history of tribes and the social structures and how they made their villages, it doesn't really add up to what we're finding in basically archaeological excavations. So I'm going to read a little bit from the book. I've read this before, but I just want to use this as a reference point because, as you can see, I underlined pretty much every single sentence of this book because it's just everything is important. So I'm going to try to go through this really quickly so I can go through the whole thing. If I can't, I'm going to upload it in parts. So they talk about the Sumerians and the Akkadians and the Babylonians, which is a lot of this is going to be about, left a vast collection of documents written on clay terracotta tablets that recorded the building of their cities, their ambitious irrigation projects, their codes of law, their astronomical and mathematical knowledge, the events of their everyday lives, and the first accounts of creation. One of the most common features of all cultures of the ancient Orient was their long-standing and direct contacts with the mythical gods of Earth. According to the clay tablets and the epigraphs, are full of strange descriptions and fantastic aspects. The Mesopotamian inscriptions contain historical accounts that were first transmitted orally from generation to generation over thousands of years ago before being set down for posterity. Many historians and archaeologists consider some of the documents to be pure legend since they contain such fantastic elements. However, Orthodox science is constantly confronted with the puzzles. The more the region is explored, then the more advanced the cultures that are discovered. One example is, and he's just going to keep on giving examples of how modern day archaeology and science doesn't really add up to basically what is being found. And one example is the village of Jafar el-Ahmar, discovered in 1995 on the Syrian bank of the Euphrates. This 11,000-year-old site was considered the oldest agricultural village in the world and offers at least 10 layers of occupation. The Franco-Syrian team of archaeologists has made discoveries there that call our knowledge of the Neolithic world in question. The oldest stones in the pictographic inscriptions found there could be dated at 5,000 BC. That's a little crazy. And this is one of the pictures. I think this is the archives room of Embla. I'm pretty sure, and this is where they discovered some of the writings. Archives room of Ebla, Syria. Kind of had that right. Another example is the site of Hulula on the opposite shore of the Euphrates, which involves a village built 10,800 years ago at the foot of the oldest known Cyclopean wall in the world. There is also the site of Abu Shahrain, formerly called Nunkiga, Eridu, i.e. consecrated to the Sumerian deity Enki, Ea, which the tablets call the oldest city of the gods. Extensive excavations conducted in 1946 to 1949 unearthed 19 levels of occupation over a period of several millennia, as well as superimpositions of 18 successive sanctuaries, a case unique to the annals of archaeology. Alright, so now I'm going to talk about or read about the ancient Mesopotamian civilization Sumerian relationship with their gods, which is really, really interesting, actually. Now he's going to talk about Samuel Noah Kramer again. He does mention him quite a lot in this chapter. The well-known specialist of Mesopotamian civilization, Samuel Noah Kramer, also noted this fact and the strange relationship. Oh, I forgot one thing. Myths are integral parts of the belief system of all cultures. Their root draws so many different religious traditions and contribute to shaping the social life of each culture and nation. The well-known specialist of Mesopotamian civilization, Samuel Noah Kramer, also noted this fact and the strange relationship of the Sumerians and their gods. The delicate problem of free will, which can be so thorny and difficult to define, and which has preoccupied so many thinkers, does not seem to have concerned the Sumerians. Convinced that they had been created to be the slaves of God, they bowed to their wishes, even when these proved to be incomprehensible or unjustifiable. The Sumerians thought that lowness and baseness, the calamities and cares of man, had been brought into this world by the gods, and they did not question the eccentric or capricious aspects of these divine beings. It was man's fate to suffer, like Job, burdened by an undeserved load. The Sumerian was raised to think that he should not complain or rebel against the incomprehensible misfortunes. He had to realize that he was a depraved being, because in the words of a wise man, no woman has ever given birth to a child untainted by original sin. Interesting. Very, very interesting. Present-day ideologies are hardly any different, except that people in our world no longer serve gods, but an implacable system of inequality that grew essentially out of the worldview of monotheistic religion. So then he starts talking about the Bible and how we should not take the Bible as the whole truth and nothing but the truth. He said that parts of, and he's going to say this also in different chapters and also in this chapter, how a lot of the Bible was influenced by the Canaanites, which were influenced by the Sumerians, because the Sumerians were far gone before the Hebrews, or the people that made the Bible, ever existed. Then he goes on to talk about words and codification of different words, especially in the Bible. The discovery of Sumerian Babylonian tablets inscribed with the word Urus-Salim, the root of divine favor, Jerusalem. And he was talking about how this created a sensation in 1975. This has also been case several decades before, when Sumerian clay tablets were found, that recorded the name Eden, or Eden, the great garden that provided the Sumerian gods with their foods. You may also be surprised to learn that Adam existed in the Sumerian language in the form of Adam, a term that refers to the real function of the gods assigned to the original humans. Okay. But more on this later. In the same way, the origins of the word Satan is entirely Sumerian. The word Satan, in fact, combines two of Sumerian terms, Satam and Sandan, also Santana. The original Sumerian sign for Sandan or Santana represented a fork or trident. And this is really interesting because the fork and the trident is also represented with the gods in the Hindu culture and also in the Greek culture. This is not in the book, but this is my observation. And in other cultures as well, I'm pretty sure. The various definitions of the two terms confirm the function of Satan described in the Judeo-Christian tradition. And he talks about how Satan was once an angel, and it says, since he belonged to the same heavenly family and worked with them, you will see we are not very far from the figure demonized by so many religion, and yet without the Satam or Sandan, the deities of the Sumerian pantheon would never have been able to prosper on earth. Then he talks about the analogies between the definition of Sumerian Adam and Satam and their biblical homonyms, and how these analogies are basically very similar. Of course, there are topics that raise tempers and touch upon very well-kept secrets. Given this, the analogies mentioned above, is there any reason to lend more credence to the historic realities of the biblical Genesis and what was on the clay tablets of the Sumerians, Akkadians, and Babylonians? And he's going to reference the Sumerians, Akkadians, and Babylonians many times in this book because that's what this book is basically based on. Then he talks about what I had said before. The Sumerians did not exert a direct influence on the Hebrews since they vanished long before the latter, and how they influenced the Canaanites, the forerunners of the texts in certain books of the Bible. So, the Old Testament and the writings on the clay tablets are not just the result of the Canaanite influences, but rather the fragmentary remains of common history. All ancient cultures have the same basic roots, just as most of the traditions on our planet describe the same events. Obvious proof of this can be found in the linguistic codification that was cleverly concealed in many ancient languages, but still resonate with them. The codification, which will be explained later in the introduction, has been ignored by scholars, specialists in ancient history of language until now. And he does have a whole chapter on language, the language of the stars and the secrets of the angels. That's chapter 4. Wow, it's really interesting that they can basically, it's like this code that can decode every single ancient language, which is quite awesome, actually. Then he goes on to talk about the Old Testament and Moses. It's obvious that they did not belong to the Hebrew worldview per se, but rather the common historical stock of humanity. This means from the myths and traditions of the lands of Chaldea, the biblical name of Mesopotamia, and the land of Abraham. The trace of this last name has come down to us in the name Abramu, found on a clay tablet 2500 BC in the ruins of the city of Ebla. That's the picture that I showed you of the ruins of the archive room in Syria in 1975. And then he talks about forbidden archaeology by American scholar a lot of you might know, Michael Cramo and Richard L. And he talks about how this, the evidence they've found, and he's going to talk about a lot of evidence found in different books and different archaeological sites that don't really corroborate with the world Darwinism theory or view. As an example, the imprint of a shoe found in a mineral deposit about 5.5 million years old. That is the time when trilobites came into existence. So what is a shoe print doing when, when trilobites existed? And you guys want to see? I have a trilobite. Let me focus that. Why isn't it focusing? Focus. Focus. Focus on my trilobite. A friend got this for me in while they were doing an excavation, I believe in Utah, I want to say. I'm not quite sure. I don't know why this doesn't want to focus. It's focused on me. You can't really see it but you could see everything. Not on camera though. That kind of sucks. I don't want to take a lot of my time on that because there's just so much to cover. Anyway, so this discovery was made on a site called Wheeler Shade in Utah. And this trilobite, which, gosh darn it, is from Utah. Anyway. The remarkable thing is that it's not an imprint of a sandal or some sort of ancient footwear, but a modern shoe with a heel. The imprint of the heel was about 4.4 millimeters deeper than the sole and worn on one side, which made it unmistakable for an imprint of a right shoe. Another of Cremo and Thompson's examples involved a perfect round metal sphere that features three indented stripes at the equator. It was found by miners in South Africa in a Precambrian mineral deposit dating back almost 3 billion years, an age when no intelligent life was supposed to have existed. Although the miners found almost several hundred of these spheres, they have never become the object of scientific publication. And I'm going to show you, if you could see, look at how perfect that sphere is. And right on the equator there's 3 lines, and there's the shoe print found. Okay, where was I? Okay. Then he talks about a geologist, Virginia McIntyre, who worked on the U.S. Geological Survey that found the site of Huehuetlacco about 80 miles outside of Mexico City, and she dated the geological site as 250,000 BC, and because of this, it basically destroyed her career. Then he talks about how a lot of the scientists and archaeologists and paleontologists have sided with the fact that Cremo and Thompson's book was disinformation, and how there is a huge conspiracy in the science and archaeological and paleontologic sciences. Then he talks about shoe prints found in another site. He talks about the review of the shoe print of the geological layer, at least 5 million years old, to discuss above. Okay. Just goes on about that. Oh, this is what I wanted to talk about. The Clifford Wilson footprints And this is in the book by Carl Edward Baugh, and it's called The Footprints of and the Stones of Time. This is a human footprint and a dinosaur footprint, and it was dated to be about the same time. And I'm going to talk about that. The scientific establishment, unfortunately, does not really even do any type of research on a lot of these things that are being found. And he does expose a lot of the disinformation people in the community, which I find hysterical. The archaeological excavations in the early 1980s of the limestone bed of Paluxy River in Texas, his first discovery were traces of dinosaurs at least 100 million years old. The only problem is that in the same layer dating from the Cretaceous period, 65 million to 135 million years old, he also found hominid footprints. It was considered impossible for human beings to have existed at the same time as dinosaurs. Carl E. Baugh organized new digs on the same riverbed and discovered even more of these footprints. And actually, he talks about the Creation Evidence Museum in Glen Rose, Texas. If anybody wants to visit, that's where a lot of this stuff is, and the founder is Carl E. Baugh, which is really interesting. It's something I might look into, because this is quite incredible that they have a museum with this stuff in it. And it goes to show how a lot of people are, or the scientific community is basically trying to say that, it's all not true, and dinosaurs and man could not coexist at the same time. Then he talks about the established order, and how a lot of, as he says, here are a few examples of the many misdeeds or unscrupulous men of science who have been unmasked. And that is Charles Dawson and his friend Smith Woodward, geologist at the British Museum, how they combined a jaw of a orangutan and a human to create the skull of the missing link, and how this was later disproved. Then he talks about Viswajit Gupta and how from these Faculty of Sciences at the University of Chandigarh in Punjab, a leading Indian expert that basically also fabricated a lot of his findings and basically bought a lot of stuff on the black market, I believe. And also archaeologist Shinji Fujimura, caught red-handed in 2000 attempting to hide fossils from his own collection on a site that he was excavating, and he said the pressure to produce results was why he basically did this, and all of his findings were later questioned. And last but not least, he exposes Zahi Hawass, which I always, even when I was a kid and I was watching him excavate these Egyptian, sites, I always there was just some mistrust that I had about him and how I didn't really believe what he had to say. But Zahi Hawass, the Supreme Council of Egyptian Antiquities, firmly denies the existence of the network of underground passages under the Plateau of Giza and the Sphinx. And even when the Japanese team from the University of Waseda examined the area with radar equipment in 1987 and found several anomalous zones and suggested the existence of interconnected caves, he again denied it. And only until recently, he had said that While anomalies have been found beneath the paws of the Sphinx, these are probably only pockets of sedimentation. So I don't buy that. And also neither does Anton Parks, because he went to Giza in 2007 with his wife, and he took a look at a lot of these dunes, and he said, well before the Eastern Cemetery we saw deep conduits at the top of the dunes. The cable was much too large to be used only for the Giza sound and light show. It was clear that excavations were still in progress in 2006 and 2007. And those are the pictures that he took. Deliberate fraud and hoaxes are not a new phenomenon in the scientific world. And then he goes on to talk about the famous case of German biologist Ernest Heckle. He's famous for comparative drawings of embryos to substantiate Darwin's theory of species. Heckle's drawings represent different stages of embryonic development in 8 vertebrate species such as fish, frog, tadpole, turtle, chicken, pig, calf, rabbit, and human beings. And this was later debunked by by Adam Sedgwick, William Bayard, and Michael Behe. So there's a new book that basically did the drawings again, because the drawings were highly stylized, and he took a lot of he made them look quite similar, and they're basically not. And he took a lot of artistic liberty in that. That's the word I was looking for. Let's see, what else? He talks about the elements help to confuse matters and bury the real history of humanity. Among them are the thousands, probably millions of objects in the hands of wealthy private collectors who are fond of keeping secrets. Most of these objects are lost to science forever. Most of them are from looting and grave robbers, and at the hands of unscrupulous dealers and fences who hasten to liquidate them from in the black market. Museums are not going to fight over these objects because they do not fit into the established system of classification. Not a few museums keep such objects stashed away in the reserves, far from prying eyes. So he's talking about how a lot of these black market stuff is owned by very wealthy collectors. Then he talks about the Martin Wilson's documentary, The Pyramids of Caral. And the pyramids are in the great city of Caral in the province of Barranca, Chile. This very ancient city has been dated between 3000 and 1600 BC, and it's officially considered to be the oldest city of the Americas. The documentary presents the various hypotheses that archaeologists advance to explain why the hunter-gatherer population of this period abandoned their former way of life in order to build cities. It is striking to see the roundabout arguments of the archaeologists and their attempt to construct hypotheses that once validated become hard convictions. And then he talks about how they speculate the Carals practiced human sacrifice, even though there's not a lot of evidence that is around that. And that is the first chapter. I'm going to go to the second chapter, but this is getting really long, so I'm going to stop it right here and then continue in another video. Bye, reflections! I hope that helped you guys, and there's a lot more to come. There's a lot in this book.